Hey there, Grumpy Old Fart here. Due to YouTube's changing quote-unquote community standards, I created a channel called Grumpy Old Fart over on Rumble, a free speech alternative to YouTube. You can see all of my stuff over there, including my political and social commentary, as well as my current events videos. The links to my YouTube and Rumble channels, as well as links to let you order my books, are in the description of this video. If you enjoy my content, please like, share, subscribe, and comment. I welcome your comments, even if you disagree with me. Now, on with the video. Hey there, Grumpy Old Fart here. I'm doing an AD&D advice video on medieval life. Okay, most of the time people we see in movies and TV shows about medieval eras were knights, nobles, and the upper crust. These people could pay servants and purchase what they need to live. Those people were wealthy landowners and or rubbed elbows with royalty. In Advanced Dungeons & Dragons, the character classes who fit into this mold were generally cavaliers, paladins, and the like. Now, certainly there were wealthy fighters, clerics, and wizards who came from the upper crust. These were not commonplace, however, and the vast majority of adventurers of the cleric, wizard, and thief, especially thief classes, come from the middle to lower classes. Let's face it, the life of an adventurer was probably far more desirable than that of a medieval peasant. Let's discuss why. Why would somebody want to adventure when they could have all of this? Ready? When a peasant wakes in the morning, he breaks his fast with breakfast. Yeah, you see that neat little word origin there? This breakfast usually consisted of some form of gruel, oatmeal, for example, salted pork or smoked pork like bacon, and bread, washed down with beer. The noon meal was bread, cheese, and meat and beer. The evening meal was generally ham, cheese, and bread, once again washed down with beer. Because they had a lot of hops. That was their thing. Generally, pigs and other livestock were slaughtered at the beginning of winter, so they would not be the animals would not need to be fed. The meat was salted or smoked to preserve it. Bread was a staple in every meal. Generally, white bread was the mark of the upper class. The browner the bread, the poorer the person. Brown breads were generally made of barley or rye. In an inn, a common meal for travelers was bread and cheese. If the traveler wanted to pay extra, there was meat and vegetables. Now, in my world, staying in an inn was generally a silver piece per night, which included a meal of bread and cheese. Just one meal. Guests could pay extra for better meals, baths, stable use, that kind of thing. Generally, laborers worked all day long. They were expected to arrive shortly after dawn and had a short meal or break near midday. Work ended when the sun went down. Laborers trudged through life earning a pittance. Many laborers worked for room and board. In my world, a reasonable wage was 1 silver piece per day for average labor. Skilled labor earned more. Unskilled, really just generic stuff, earned far less. In my world, slaves worked for food, and if they did not perform, beatings and other punishments were common. In some areas, the slave trade in my world was considered an honorable profession. In those areas, it was bad form to mistreat or punish slaves. A slave who was beaten had marks, and that slave could not be sold for as much as an unmarked slave. However, any way you want to paint the pig, it's still a pig. And the abolition of slavery is and has always been a great goal for player character adventurers. I had a group of player characters who targeted slave owners in every town they went to. One of the player characters started out as a slave, and the rest joined in his obsessive and justifiable vendetta. By the time the group had hit 9th level, slavery was gone from the world. They wiped that shit out, and amen. Slavery is evil. I try to make my world as realistic as possible, and there are bastards in every era. So yeah, slavery did exist. Getting rid of it is a hell of a good thing for the player characters to do. Crime and punishment in medieval times was harsh and brutal. Murder, theft, etc. was illegal and carried heavy punishments. A man could be beaten or imprisoned for a long period of time, or even executed for a big enough theft. Murderers were generally executed, sometimes imprisoned if they had political favor or whatever. In my world, murder, blasphemy, treason, and the like were punishable by death. Theft was punishable by imprisonment. Generally, this is what I generally do. Up to a gold piece, you can get a year. If you steal something up to 20 gold pieces, you can get 5 years. Up to 1,000 gold pieces, you can get 10 years. And over 1,000 gold pieces, you can get 20 years in prison. And it's up to the whim of the guy, of the judge, the noble who's overseeing the case. Well, he's been here before and he stole before. Yeah, let's just put him in there forever. Or let's just execute him and be done with it. Save having to feed him. Or my favorite is when the noble shows up and he's holding audience and he's holding court like that, and he comes in and he's been drinking the night before. He's got a hangover, and he says, "Okay, how many we got? 30? Oh man, I don't feel like that. Okay, the first 10 are guilty, off with their heads. Now go on." Which, by the way, did happen. A particularly heinous theft could mean that the prison term would be as harsh and brutal as the guards could make it. Guards were rarely punished for brutality. Now, a word on blasphemy. Blasphemy in my world was... In my world, each town, region, or nation had a specific religion, a pantheon, which was sanctioned by the ruling body. This was the favored religion. Similarly, aligned deities were generally accepted. If you were, for example, if you went into a major port city in my world, they have this thing called Temple Row. Most large towns have a Temple Row where all the pantheist temples were lined up and easy to find. Most towns have a temple. Most big cities have a Temple Row. If you went into a port town, a port city, and you wanted to go and worship your god, say you worshipped Hera, and you go over there and you're going to go find the Greek pantheon. Well, right next door you got the Norse temple, and next to that you got the what do you call it, the Celtic temples, and blah 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 blah, and on down the line. They're all there, and nobody gets punished for that. Blasphemy in this context would be if a person was to worship, for example, a demon or a devil, or a deity that specifically was outlawed by the ruling body, and there had to be a reason for it. They just didn't outlaw them because they didn't like them. There had to be a reason. Now, a word on serfs. Every medieval society had serfs. A serf is a poor laborer who is bound to serve a specific lord, castle, or manor. Serfs are not slaves. A lord can sell the labor of a serf, in effect lending a serf to work for another for a time, but not the serf himself. Serfs are not owned per se, but are bound into service almost like an indentured servant. A serf could be imprisoned indefinitely. A lord could take all of a serf's possessions. A lord could kill a serf, but bloodshed was frowned upon. Many serfs were starved to death or thrown out on a cold winter night to freeze. Many were drowned, but no bloodshed. The loopholes. It's all about the loopholes. Sharecroppers were a type of serf, and the amount of crops left for them by the lord was completely up to the landlord. Everything a serf had was owned by the lord, and it could be taken or used at will with little or no notice. The difference between serfs and peasants is that if a peasant was unhappy where he was, he could leave. Serfs who tried to leave were imprisoned or beaten or whatever. Serfs paid taxes, rent, and other random payments to the lord. A serf was treated as part of the estate and came with the land. Serfs were required to serve in the lord's armies. Serfs needed permission to get married. In effect, they were slaves in every way except name. They couldn't be sold, though. A fair and good lord treated his serfs and servants with a fair degree of respect. Many lords were not fair and good. A landowner in my world is generally an industrious member of society. Most often, lords used every part of their land to generate profit, and the serfs are used to make that happen. Agriculture was the predominant means, but quarries, smithies, distilleries, wineries, and the like are also common. A lord who generated enough wealth to purchase more land was considered successful. He then could use this new land to make new ways to generate even more wealth. There are a plethora of resources available to any dungeon master online to find out what you need to know about, to kind of flesh out your medieval world. There are a number of YouTube channels I would recommend. Here we go. Weird History, History Hit, Modern History TV, Captivating History, Medieval Madness, Simple History, Chronicle, a channel called Chronicle Medieval History Documentaries. Many of the videos on these channels are not only informative, but they're very fun to watch. As always, the richness, depth, and realism of the portrayal of your medieval setting is paramount to your players' enjoyment, and all of that is dependent on the amount of research you do beforehand. Many adventurers are thought of by the local lords and nobles as outlaws. The reason being is they don't fit anywhere in that society. They show up every other month or whatever with a great hoard of cash, and nobody knows where they got it. And you're like, well, they're got to be stealing it from somewhere. No, they just robbed the orcs, or they found it out in this old abandoned fortress or whatever. But they prove that. That's the thing. So when adventurers show up and they have all this money, look up economies and the governments that I did videos on those. Check those out. But when adventurers show up and they have all this money, the Lord kind of wonders where it came from and why he's not getting a cut. You see what I'm saying? That's the way I run my world. So adventurers kind of have to keep a low profile. They can party at night in the inn, that's fine. But eventually somebody's going to ask where they got their money from and why the Lord isn't getting his cut. And I'm not talking about religion. I'm talking about the guy who lives in the castle. Okay? I hope this finds everybody well, and I hope these videos help. I really do. And I'm not trying to tell you how to run your world. You're a dungeon master. You run it how you want. I'm just an old hack wargamer with over 40 years of experience doing this. I'm just trying to help. You folks have a good day. God bless one and all. Clarissa Lowe, a historian from the future. Delmore Kane, a Civil War veteran turned outlaw. This oddball pairing faces a conspiracy of epic proportions spanning the centuries. If you like action and adventure westerns with a splash of science fiction and fantasy, check out my book series Drifters and their ongoing adventures.